Hi, and welcome to Inspiring Doubt. I'm your host, Greg Bray. I'm a skeptic. This is the second episode of Inspiring Doubt. I hope that you tune in every Wednesday at 6 p.m. The show, unlike the first one, is broadcasting live. And today I am joined by Justin Schieber of Reasonable Doubts podcast. See here, it is the live show. That I did verify ahead of time, though, that I'm saying his name correctly now. I think in the end of the last show I did. And of course the guest we had in the last show was Guy P. Harrison, the author of Think, Why You Should Question Everything. Next week we'll be joined by Dr. John Shook. And this week, again, we have Justin Schieber of Reasonable Doubts, which I'm jealous, by the way, of Reasonable Doubts. I think I mentioned this to you before, but this show, Inspiring Doubt, and the page and website it originated from, Reasonable Doubts was the name that I wanted. And then I found your podcast and was upset that it was already taken. So,
hi, and welcome to Inspiring Doubt.
Oh, that's hold on. I've got the
skeptic.
YouTube. There it goes.
There we go.
I was getting a feedback from myself there. So, Justin, today I am hoping to talk to you about your tenure on Reasonable Doubts, and now you're, I think, 128 episodes in. You put out one every couple of weeks. They're wonderful to listen to, incredibly informative, incredibly well put together, and I think that there's a huge amount of value to the effort that you put into having a polished final product. Not to disparage anywhere else, or myself even, but there's a lot of live recordings that never have any sort of post-edit that are put out there, and it's really nice to have something that is put together in the way that your shows are, so I really appreciate that. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with Reasonable Doubts?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Greg. So I got started because I was meeting with a local pastor. Once I started taking this stuff seriously, once I started getting really interested in philosophy of religion, I started hanging out with local pastors a lot of the time and discussing these things. And we would hold small coffee shop debates where we'd go to a coffee shop and reserve a time, and then we'd have our friends out, and we'd debate the issues, and it would get really interesting, and our audience would steadily grow once people learned about this, and it became a pretty neat little event that was held every couple weeks or so. And then I learned about the CFI Michigan chapter, and got in contact with some of them, and this whole time I've been listening to Reasonable Doubts, and I really had no idea that they were in my city. And so I met Jeremy Bien, a co-host of mine, and we became good friends, and he invited me on the show, and that was back in early 2011, and so then I've been on since, and it's been a great time. So essentially what we do is we're just four atheists, and we critically analyze religion from a number of different perspectives. So we look at it regarding biblical studies, philosophy of religion, psychology of religion, mythology, a whole bunch of different topics, and my kind of area of focus on the show would be more along the lines of philosophy of religion, and so that's my focus on the show.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but last time we spoke, I believe you've never formally studied philosophy, which is, I think, incredibly impressive. The sophistication and the or how articulate you are in speaking about this. This is all just from your own personal study, right?
Yeah, it's essentially I have just too much free time, and so and I have a kind of obsessive thing with this topic for some reason. I find it just completely fascinating, and I'll always, and it's not just the whole religious thing; it's the whole study of philosophy and of logic. All these things are intertwined in my kind of where my brain orients itself, and so I think I'll always find these of dear interest to me.
I appreciate that a lot. There's a fair amount of, I guess, credentialism that occurs when you talk about debates especially, and I love seeing, I was looking through some of your debates earlier, and who was it, Max Andrews, I think, was the one that had the
Yes.
Several, his masters in philosophy, and I'm
Yeah,
now
Masters in
doubting
Philosophy and Biblical Studies, and currently
myself.
he's
Yeah,
working
right.
on a PhD at Edinburgh University.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that is a impressive opponent. I mean, in that respect, somebody very, very educated to go up against, and you did a fantastic job.
Thank
It
you.
shows a lot about your dedication to really understanding these things. And I bring it up not to disparage, your lack of credentials, but to demonstrate how incredibly knowledgeable a person can be without actually having the credentials, but how there is a difference between that. There's a difference between being very knowledgeable and not having credentials, and just not having credentials and thinking that you know what you're talking about on a topic. I run into a fair amount of that. So I get accused a bit of being elitist, but I wanted to make it very clear that I have an incredible amount of respect for you, and even in my situation, I have a bachelor's degree in biology, so I hardly have a massive roster of credentials on my curriculum vitae.
Hey, it's more than me, man. All the power to you.
So with reasonable doubts, you tackle different topics and different angles every week. I love that it has this the very clear theme, and you kind of have a flow to each episode as well. How do you pick your topics for that?
Oh, it's usually done in a very ad hoc, thrown together kind of way, and somehow, at least most of the time, it happens to intentionally look like that was the purpose of it all. Um, Sometimes when we get lucky, we'll look into a topic, and I'll have a certain argument, and then Galen, who's our kind of psych of religion guy, will have some new studies that he's come across that somehow tangentially relate to that issue, and sometimes we can tie in a news story loosely, and if we work our transitions right, it can seem like one big coherent narrative, but usually that's a very contrived thing. So,
well, it's well executed. I'll give you that.
Excellent.
Again, the power of the post edit, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We one of the things that I really wanted to bring you on here about is, and we talked about in, I guess, our previous conversations, is debates. I know that when you gave me your card, that's one of the things that's listed on it, that, debater, and I find that really impressive that you are willing to put yourself out there and say, like, please invite me and do these, not sort of being really, I guess, cautious or vetting it, but saying, no, please, I'm confident enough that I am happy to debate anybody who'd like to challenge. That's right there. I mean, I think not just the fact that you are willing to do it, but the fact that you have done several and have done very well in them is a testament to how dedicated you are to this topic. Can you tell us about some of the debates that you have done recently?
Yeah. So of the topics I've done the existence of God. I'd done a resurrection debate a while ago that was never recorded, but and recently, just this past Friday, I participated in a debate about marriage equality, about whether or not we should extend civil marriage rights to gay couples, and that was just a blast, because that was a brand new topic to me to be debating publicly, and so it was a lot of fun digging into how I wanted to exactly structure my arguments and things like this. So it was one of those new fun things for me. But of the different formats that I've done, as you said, with Max Andrews, what we did was a kind of almost like a written debate where he would write his opening statement to 20 minutes, because at the end of the day, it was all going to be put into an audio form. And so we wanted to script our responses according to the allotted time slot. And so at the end of the day, when you're listening to the product, all you're hearing is the correctly timed audio debate. But behind the scenes, it was several scripted responses back and forth over a month period of time. And so it gets really in depth and really technical. But that's my favorite part of this stuff. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the most impressive. I mean, listening to it and then going back and learning how you done that. That was a fantastic idea for a debate. I do a lot of debating in writing, and some debating over video of this nature, and some live, but informally. I've never really participated in a formal debate of that nature, but I've never had one that sort of combined the written debate and the spoken debate in the way that you did, and I thought it made for a really cool final product.
Excellent.
You also... oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just I wanted to say that kind of style to me really is preferable because for a number of different reasons. Because it puts the emphasis on the arguments rather than on one's ability to think on their feet. And I think that that's such an important thing because if you stumble on a live debate, that can make your side look really poor, even if there's a perfectly appropriate response to that argument, right? You just couldn't grasp it mentally at the time. So live debates, while they have their own benefits, they do suffer from certain kinds of liabilities in that way, where if you're not perfectly on your game, you can really drop the ball.
That's a really, really good point, and I want to get more into debates and sort of the positives and negatives related to them with you in a bit. But I wanted to cover sort of the other or some of the other topics that you've debated. You said marriage equality was a recent one, but your other three that I have here, we've got Michael Horner, Stephen Kozak, and Max Anders with does God exist? Does the Christian God exist? And does the God of Christianity exist, respectively? Pretty specific theme there. I like that you denoted for the latter two that it was the Christian God. There's nothing more frustrating than not having a clear definition of what you're even debating.
Right.
Take sort of an atheistic position at that point. But I wanted to sort of challenge you on those topics at all because
Sure.
It drives me nuts when I see people debating, does God exist? And I think that you, as the philosopher that you are, may sort of disagree with me on this because I think of things in a bit more of a science position than
Sure.
using philosophy after. But I hate debating, does God exist? To me, that is a nearly meaningless question. For me, it is, are we justified in believing that a God exists?
Okay.
Which is I guess a nuance to some extent, but that I think it makes a huge difference in it because as an atheist, I'm not sitting here saying no, God absolutely does not exist and making this claim as I certainly disbelieve in just about every definition of God that's ever been given to me and see no sufficient reason to believe that it does exist, and in some cases, many reasons not to. But the question, does God exist, seems like it's a little bit too absolute as I see it. So I like to focus more on the epistemology side of it, I guess, and say, should we believe this? Why do you opt to, or do you just not nitpick about the title or the specific topic?
To be clear, when I was debating Michael Horner on the question of does God exist, that was what it said on the flyer. But in the actual debate, we both explicitly agreed that we would be debating the existence of the Christian God. But when it comes to, at least in when philosophers use the word God, 99% of the time they're talking about classical theism, right? Where there's this, it might not be necessarily the Christian God, but it is a God that is all powerful, all knowing, and morally perfect, right? Now, I actually think that debate would be a really interesting debate. I think that kind of hypothesis, that kind of claim about reality, does make some predictions about the world that, depending on whether we do observe those predictions or we do not, can either confirm or disconfirm that hypothesis. So, for example, if we think that God is all morally perfect and He's all powerful and all knowing, then certain facts about suffering, I think, are extremely strong evidence against that hypothesis, regardless of whether we're talking about the Christian-specific version of that God. And then, of course, once you talk about the Christian-specific version, then you have the a priori concerns that say, look, even before looking at the evidence, those hypotheses are not on equal footing. They're not both equally probable, right? So so it's clear that the Christian God hypothesis is intrinsically less probable than theism, because what the Christian God hypothesis is just theism plus a whole bunch of other stuff. Those other details are liabilities, and so even before looking at the evidence, it's less probable than the original theistic hypothesis. And then, of course, once you look at the evidence, you have some problems when you're looking at the specifically Christian God hypothesis. So I think that all these different versions are susceptible to confirmation and disconfirmation, depending on how specific you want to get with that God.
The point you were making about having the sort of the probability being reduced by adding more to it is one. That's one of the most common fallacies that people make in our daily lives as well, and it's that the probability, just sort of completely misunderstanding that. So I love that you made that so perfectly clear there. But of course, I have to say you could be wrong about that. So I bring that up only because I know we both also had our experiences with Psi-10 Bruggencate.
Oh God, no!
As delightful as those are. So on those ones, and that sort of leads me as a segue to the next point here. How do you determine whether a debate is worth your time?
Oh God. I guess it would be. I'd be taking into a number of considerations. I think, if the debate being proposed is with an individual that I just don't think has a grasp on the arguments, then it's really not going to be an interesting conversation. There's no potential for anybody to be really learning anything in that kind of context. Yeah, I think that would primarily be one of my main concerns, is that. That's not to say that I've always kept to that criteria in the past, but I definitely plan to in the future. So, yeah.
I find that there's a draw to debates. Again, most of mine are in a written format, but there's a great comic out there. I think it was XKCD that put it out. That was wait, I can't come to bed. Somebody's wrong on the internet.
Yeah.
That's how I feel all the time, and it drives me nuts. It drives my wife nuts, really, because I could put literally full-time hours at least, 60, 70 hours a week, just arguing with people. It's a thrill. I enjoy it. So I get a lot of intrinsic value from debating, even if it is with somebody who, for all intents and purposes, is just a troll. But that I don't think is a sufficient justification for bringing debates into the public sphere, because there are some criticisms about it as well.
Absolutely.
Specifically, the reason I bring this up is twofold. One, we have the Bill Nye debate, which I did quite a bit. I mean, I went to a local fundamentalist church to watch that, and was live tweeting during it, and it was a good time. I enjoyed the debate, but there was a lot of criticism around that. And then, of course, there's the upcoming debate at the end of this month between Matt Dillahunty and our friend Psi. That is going to be going on, hosted by, I think it's Recovering from Religion is putting it on, part of, with a few other organizations. So those ones both have gotten a fair amount of criticism, groaning, backlash for sort of giving an audience to these fringe positions. How do you feel about that issue?
I actually have no problem giving an audience to fringe positions, especially because I don't think that, I don't think that Ken Ham's position is fringe. It certainly is fringe in the scientific community, don't get me wrong, but in the general public, there's a significant amount of the population that does accept a view like his, or something very, very comparable. And a debate like that, I think, was was refreshing. Honestly, I thought it was a good opportunity. I thought it was a good thing. I think that I think that when people say we run the risk of legitimizing our opponent in that way, I think what the problem I see with that is that that's only true when we actually don't do our preparational work, right? When we don't do our homework, when we don't spend the time to really look into our opponent, find out the arguments he uses, find out the responses to the usual arguments on our side, and really engage with the subject, really customize the debate to that individual, and really kind of drive the points home. I think when I learned afterwards that all of the proceeds went directly to Ken Ham's cult, or whatever you want to call it, that is extremely unfortunate. That was a terrible decision, and that deserves scorn. But the debate itself, I think, was entirely appropriate, and I was glad to see it happen. Although after learning about where the money went, that was extremely disappointing. As with Sye Ten Bruggencate, here's the thing. I'm not opposed to debates with him, but the issue is whether or not his opponents actually structure the debate in such a way as to not let his usual tactics enter the picture, right? If it's a conversational debate, it's over. Okay, it can't be that. It needs to be structured. It needs to be clean and decisively moderated. And I sure hope that Dillahunty is actually doing his homework on this subject. There's a number of huge problems with Sye's view, and I have every confidence in the world that Matthew is doing his due diligence on the issue, and so I probably won't watch it just because I can't stand Sye Ten Bruggencate. But if I hear it's good, then I'll probably watch a few minutes of it here and there.
Right, I certainly won't watch it live. It's my best friend's bachelor party that day, so if I did,
all right, you lucked out.
That's actually good. If it's just any time he says you could be wrong, I have to take a drink, then it could be a blast.
It could be a terrible decision to make.
Right. But yeah, I will more than likely watch it, and I have enough respect in Matt that I think or I guess enough confidence in him that I think he will do his homework and come into this properly prepared. But I mean, that's a huge difference that it comes with a formal debate that is scheduled versus sort of an impromptu debate. That's how you and I really met initially, was an impromptu debate when we were both attending the Freedom from Religion Foundation convention, and there was a group of creationists standing on the steps of the Wisconsin State Capitol.
Oh, yeah.
Their declarations, it was me, you, Justin Vacula, and one other guy that, as far as I can tell, wasn't involved in blogging or podcasting or anything like that, but it worked out well that the three of us who happened to do this sort of semi-professionally were there at the same time. So
right.
It was entertaining, but I think once again, the sort of live impromptu debate doesn't allow you to come into it as well prepared as you can ahead of time, and knowing your opponent, knowing the arguments that are going to be set. Exactly. And one of the things that's frustrating for me is specifically in the fact that he was arguing creationism, is that it's really easy to just say, well, there's a new study that says this. There's a new piece of evidence that says that. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing these verbal spoken debates with nothing, I mean, not even having the internet there in front of you that you can just look these up. That's one of the advantages to a written debate, at least, is then you can examine the claims that somebody makes. But I find it a real challenge to have somebody throw things like that at me and not just dismiss it and say, well, I haven't read the study, so I can't count that as evidence.
Yeah.
It adds a new dynamic to it. That's why someday I would like to do a live debate that is planned ahead like yours. But first, I am going to ask you what you think, at least, the value of doing something like that is. What's the real goal behind doing these debates?
Yeah, so I think, well, okay, so there's the goal of a debate, like what are we really trying to accomplish? I think there's a number of things that we're trying to accomplish in doing that, but I guess those could be divided between, you know, goals that are just generally tend to be fulfilled, and then those goals that, you know, for the general public, and then there's goals that reasons why I personally debate, right? So those are not necessarily the same question. So why do I debate? Well, for a number of reasons, including that it's fun, it's challenging. You know, interacting with an opponent's arguments can, in a serious way, can be stimulating and very humbling intellectually. It
But you can do
improves
that
my,
in in your basement with just the two of you, right? So I mean, there's sort of the goal of doing the debate publicly is, I think, the
right.
real
Okay,
question.
yeah, yeah. Well, it improves my thinking in the sense that you have to think on the spot. It improves skills when it comes to, you know, public speaking, effective communication, and an ability to research, an ability to focus your research on a particular individual, and you know, generally helps me narrow in on the truth. And you know what the goods are for a general public debate. I think you know, the opportunity to publicly criticize and expose dangerous ideas, I think, is something that is extremely valuable. It can promote and encourage education and a understanding between two usually divisive sides. It can promote respectful communication, and all of these points, of course, apply both to individuals and society at large. And when done correctly, public debate can promote civil discussion and be a model of how people can move forward in their lives to engage in opponents in a respectful manner, in a productive manner. And yeah, I think especially, you know, if there's a Q&A, you have the opportunity to ask a question of a person who's really looked into the topic. And so I think that those are all very valuable things. And as I said before, I don't think that this necessarily, you know, adds a kind of significance or legitimacy to the other side. I think that when that does happen, it's always because the assumed correct side is just not taking their obligations seriously. They're not doing their homework, and so they end up underprepared. And so when the other side kind of mops the floor with them through rhetorical games or what have you, then yeah, we look silly, but rightly so. You know, if you're going to do this stuff, you should do your homework.
That's one. I love the rhetorical games point, because that is something that I've gone to debates and reminded people of, while talking about them even beforehand and things, saying that regardless of what the topic is, I'm always hesitant to go in sort of choosing a side. For one, I think that's a rather ridiculous proposition to go in with the assumption that one side is going to win the debate, and to recognize that debate is an art form as much as it is a tool. So I have no problem recognizing that William Lane Craig is an excellent debater. One of the best I've seen in his ability to utilize the format very well, and to present his arguments in a cogent manner. And even he avoids generally things like the sort of the Gish Gallop and the other tactics that are common to debates, but
Right.
a great showman, very sharp with what he does. And I've watched some debates with him and others that struggle. It is, as you mentioned, public speaking and other sort of intrinsic values or your skills as a public communicator play a big role in that. So that's
Absolutely.
It is something that is good for people to keep in mind, regardless of what debate they're going to. Is that nothing upsets me more than seeing somebody obviously get trounced in a debate as far as the style, the format, the debating things go, but have the clearly stronger case overall, and then have the people who are sort of the fanboys going in ahead of time say, well, that person won. Like, I feel it's dishonest. I watched a debate actually with Dan Barker here in my hometown, where I thought he just got the floor mopped with him. That was a very, very smooth-talking creationist, whose name is not coming to mind right now. I'll get it in just a second here, but it's sometimes even more difficult to be debating from sort of the con position than it is for the pro position for anything, because you need to be ready to respond to whatever argument they happen to bring to the table, whereas their job is a little bit less open-ended, so they can have a more rehearsed speech that they're coming in with. And it truly shows. I mean, the one that I saw, he had PowerPoints that were all put together, and an assistant who was there that had a very nicely choreographed PowerPoint for anything he was talking about that was popping right in and out. Obviously, a very well-trained crew he brought with him as well.
Yeah.
And then there was Dan Barker, who is very knowledgeable. He's a fantastic debater, but has no visual aids, and was talking entirely just off the cuff. And frankly, I don't even think he was taking notes. You only get a certain amount of the audience with a purely auditory debate. Not all people learn that way, so there's limitations to it, I guess.
Yeah, no, and here's the thing is, you know, if you're going to be doing this stuff, I think it's important that you do try and reach, you know, a number of different people in a number of different styles by using visual aids. It's very easy to put together a PowerPoint presentation. That shouldn't be beyond anybody's skill set, really. So I would wonder why he didn't do that. You know, I think that he should have.
I've seen him debate live twice now, and he didn't bring visual aids for either of them. And it was awkward, actually, for one of them, because his opponent that was it left his visual aids up during that, so it was a bit of a distraction in that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously these things, the visual aids are there to aid your effective communication, and so if you're doing a debate which is going to require some effective communication, then why would you not do that if that's available to you? If they're saying, look, we're going to have, you know, would you like to bring a slideshow? We'll have a projector, and, you know, etc. Well, of course, that should be an obvious thing to anybody who takes their debating seriously.
So how much prep time would you say you put into, I mean, aside from obviously the written / broadcast one that you did, the other live debates that you've done, how much do you prepare for those in terms of hours or weeks?
Oh, probably too much.
Good answer.
I put in quite a lot, just because I'm petrified of being up there and not having a response, or not understanding my arguments fully, or not understanding their arguments fully. And so actually part of what I insist upon is, when doing a live debate, that at least a few days before, preferably a week before, that we exchange at least the basic form of the arguments, right? So, if my opponent's going to use the Kalam cosmological argument or the moral argument, both of Craig's versions of those arguments, then he would send me, the two premise and a conclusion structure of the argument, and I would send him the various arguments that I'll be using in that same way. And that way, it's more ensured that we're not going to be talking past each other and talking about, because a lot of times people fail to distinguish between different versions of the same argument, and I think that that's really problematic, because someone wants to use a fine-tuning argument in the style that Craig uses it, William Lane Craig, which is to give three different possible explanations for the observations of apparent fine-tuning that we see, and then to use process of elimination to get down to, well, design is the only reasonable explanation here, right? That's a different approach from a, say, likelihood approach to fine-tuning, where one says that the fine-tuning observations are more likely under theism, and they're very unlikely on naturalism. Therefore, the fine-tuning evidence supports theism over naturalism, right? And the responses that one gives to that argument are going to differ between what version the person's using, right? And so often in a live debate, if someone says, my next argument is the fine-tuning argument, then the guy on our side is just thinking, oh, he pulls out his usual responses to fine-tuning, regardless of whether they're actually going to be applicable to that particular version. And so I think that understanding the multiple versions of these different kinds of arguments is essential for an effective dealing with the arguments of the other side. And the same, of course, goes for their side, right? If I'm using a problem of evil in evidential form, then they can't just bring out the appeal to free will and think that they've handled the issue. You know, that might handle the logical problem, right, if they can defend that, but it's not necessarily going to be applicable to all versions of the problem of evil that I might be using.
So, having done these debates and having sort of the public position that you do, I'm sure you've gotten a fair amount of feedback from them. Now, of course, some of this is going to be people just trashing you, and some people are going to be just fanboys. But have you gotten any really sort of useful or unexpected feedback from the debates that you've done?
I'm almost certain I have. It's just difficult to bring those up exactly what they were.
Don't have any anecdotes that sort of pop out at you?
Unfortunately not. I have a number of good friends that I regularly talk with about these issues, and you know, they follow the debates, and I know when I'm preparing for a debate, I'll run things by them, and usually they have like really excellent changes to, you know, hey, maybe you should try this version here, or, you know, maybe you should say this slightly differently. A lot of this is just very nuanced stuff that you know, a lot of times there's a kind of temptation to be really rigorous in your argumentation, and so you want to be very technical, but then of course you got to balance that with the fact that you're reading this stuff to a kind of general audience, an audience that isn't necessarily going to be familiar with like analytic philosophy, right? So you need to make it more intuitive, and sometimes just a simple word choice is going to work with that. And I've had a number of suggestions along those lines of just, you know, a couple word choice differences will really help in how you're communicating this idea. And so I think having a good circle of trusted friends like that can really is certainly a valuable to me.
Have you been contacted by anybody who has, say, watched one of these debates and was sort of riding the fence beforehand and was swayed by what you've said, or found it incredibly educational, learned something really new from watching your debate?
I've been doing these debates not for very long, just for about a year and a half or so. But I do know that our podcast, in fact, just the other day, I received an email in the podcast email saying how there was an individual who was actually started listening to our show because he wanted to learn how to ruin atheistic arguments, right? And over the years, he's done a complete 180, and still has reservations about certain particular issues of a purely naturalistic worldview, but largely has completely abandoned a kind of traditional theistic worldview. And to be honest with you, that's not necessarily the goal. I'm not here to try and win deconverts, to try and get notches on my proverbial atheistic belt, right? I'm really interested.
Wrong, obviously.
I'm primarily interested in promoting critical thinking and getting people to think critically about the beliefs that they do have. And I try to make that clear in the debates that I do. I'm not trying to steal your religion away from you. I think, of course, that when someone does apply critical thinking, that they will eventually drop these theistic beliefs. But of course, that's not my goal necessarily. My goal is to really just promote critical thinking. I think that that's much more of the goal we should be aiming at, because let's face it, we're not going to get rid of religion, but we can make people more rational if we encourage it.
I completely agree with you on that, and I'm going to press you a little bit more on that, but we've only
Okay.
got about 10 minutes left in the show, and there's some viewer comments and questions here that I wanted to go over. So first, I have to ask, because with the New Covenant group, we are sort of noted for having a very loose conversational style, not even really debates, but discussions, and sometimes that really blows up in your face. Anybody who's watched our episode with Dave Silverman, Eric Hoven, and Cy Ten Bruggencate knows exactly what we're talking about there. In many cases, it offers a sort of a completely different dynamic where it's a little bit less adversarial, and the conversational, at least if you're inviting the right guests and having people on that aren't coming in here with the tenacity of a bulldog. But
Right.
the conversational format allows for a little bit more sort of exploration of each other's beliefs mutually, as opposed to opposition and critique. So, is there a reason that you sort of opt more for the debate format and don't? Because I mean, Reasonable Doubts, you do the podcast as well, but it's not frequent that you have other guests on there that are not coming on as sort of either an ally or an adversary. So for the most part, it's debates or you guys talking about other positions. So have you considered at all trying to do the conversation style?
Oh, I've considered it, and I mean, to be honest, unfortunately, it's rather difficult to find someone who is. I mean, I hate saying this, but it's rather difficult to find someone who's both very familiar with the arguments and is willing to have a purely conversation, exploratory kind of approach to it. A lot of times people will enter in with that kind of, the tenacity of a bulldog kind of approach, right? And secondly, it's just not generally the format of the show. So we save those kinds of interactions for a kind of structured formal debate, because I do think there's a lot of value in, especially when you want to unpack the more technical side of arguments, that people be allowed to, a lot of their 10, 15 minutes to really unpack the argument before someone replies, right? I think that's extremely important, because a lot of times in these conversational debates you can get mixed up in equivocations and talking past each other. It can get really difficult. But if it's a good formal structure, I think that can help immensely to getting to really unpacking the ideas and being clear about them. So yeah, I mean, there's benefits on both sides of those things. It just tends to be that our show tends to be criticism of religion, and then spiced in with a few of these debates that are formally structured with the other side, right?
Mm-hmm. So a couple other questions from the viewers then, specifically for you here. This is, I guess I'm going to combine these and sort of give them all to you at the same time here. So we had somebody ask, what type of tactic do you find the most challenging, I'm assuming, to address in a debate? What type of tactic do you find the most annoying? And what do you think is the strongest theist argument?
Oh, good. Okay, so I'll start with the last one first, and then you'll probably have to remind me what the first two are.
Okay.
So I think that one of the strongest theistic arguments is actually an argument that moves from it's a likelihood argument that kind of relies on the observations that there are moral agents, and what I mean by that is agents capable of kind of metacognition, thinking about how their behavior will affect future events. So it's a certain kind of complexity of mind, not just of your lower mammals and such, but of higher cognition. I think that those kinds of minds are very, very likely under theism antecedently, and then they're very unlikely antecedently on a kind of naturalism, right? And so I think that bit of evidence strongly supports theism over naturalism. But while I think that that's their strongest argument, I think that generally all the other arguments are pretty poor. And then you have the additional fact that on the naturalistic side or the atheistic side, which naturalism entails atheism, obviously, on our side, we have both the evidential argument from evil and divine hiddenness, which I think are two distinct and powerful arguments that that really I don't think theism can dig itself out of, I guess I would say.
And you just recently did a podcast about divine hiddenness. That was
yes,
2-3 episodes ago. So,
yep.
We forgot to mention this so far, but to any of the viewers, the website is doubtcast.org, right?
Yes.
That'll redirect. It's you're on Free Thought Blogs with
Mm-hmm.
/reasonable doubts, but doubtcast.org. You can find these. You also have a Facebook page that's Reasonable Doubts. You've got a YouTube channel, and
and if anyone's interested in my debates in particular, I have a website where I kind of catalog these, and that's justinsway.com, spelled JUSTINSWEH, which is also my Twitter handle. So.
Aside from that, we did have the other questions. What type of tactic do you find the most challenging, and what tactic do you find the most annoying? However, I may just leave those up in the air here, and because there's something that I really wanted to call you on here before the end.
Good. Call me out.
Here. And that is your statement a few minutes ago. You said that I'm going to try to quote you here. It says, "I'm trying to promote critical thinking." Was your that's your goal, you stated. So I have to ask, Inspiring Doubt, the last guest we had on was author Guy P. Harrison, talk about why you should question everything, his book. He does specifically have his book, 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God, great at sort of this, the promoting skepticism, but I used to start my show, Inspiring Honesty, with I'm an atheist, because that was sort of novel at the time. I was an atheist with a theistic co-host for the first time, but really that's a label that I use to identify a part of me, and it's sort of categorical. Whereas skeptic is really sort of what I identify intrinsically with. Critical thinking, as I see it, goes so far beyond just the religious questions that
Absolutely.
I would love to see Reasonable Doubts branch out more. And your name does not specifically denote that it's about religion. Why do you focus so much on that and not get outside of it into other quackery and hokum?
Well, because there are people out there that are far better at those topics than we are. So we all have religious backgrounds. We all have a fairly severe interest in all topics, religion, and so we all came together for that purpose, for critically examining religious claims and Christianity in particular. So that's kind of our niche. Obviously we're not the only people doing this, of course, but that's where we want to put our focus. If we were to talk about all those other things, then we address issues about religion and politics, right? And so we do occasionally get into the gay marriage thing. Again, I just had that debate on Friday.
Right. That struck me as unusual, actually, when you mentioned.
Yeah, and I've done a debate on abortion. So all these issues are, I think, very tangentially related to religion. I think that, the abortion question is largely a question of metaphysics. I think that most of the time, your religion is going to determine largely how you might think about that. I think that, I'm not saying that it will necessarily determine, but I think that obviously it's a very strong predictor of a certain view on these subjects. And on those intersections of religion and politics and social issues, I think that that's all very appropriate grounding. But I'm not particularly interested in talking about vaccines or other hooey stuff, astrology and things like that. Not because I don't think it's important. So obviously it's quite important. It's just that my interests and expertise are in a narrow range, as well as the other guys, and so that's kind of where we've set the show's course.
And that probably speaks quite a bit to the quality of your broadcasts and how they're very impressive they all are versus I cast a very broad net with what I do and try to go all across the board and hit the vaccines, the alternative medicine,
Sure.
I don't really go too much into the cryptozoography or other things of that nature, but someday.
Right.
Um,
Well, there you go.
I guess we are basically out of time here, and the other questions I'm not going to have a chance to get to, but I want to say thank you very much for joining me for this show and joining us, taking questions from the audience. I look forward to working with you again in the future. You're welcome back anytime. Love to have you. Are there any topics, if we do come across those, that you would specifically like to address, if I should keep you in mind for?
Oh, well, my interests right now are kind of between, the problem of evil and divine hiddenness. Those are kind of my research focuses, I suppose you could say. So if you're ever wanting to have a show on those topics, I would absolutely love to join you guys. And thank you very much, of course, for having me on.
Absolutely. Like I said, anytime you're welcome back. I love having somebody on the show who's more articulate than me, and I can just ask questions and let you give the good answers. So thank you to everybody in the audience as well for joining us today. Once again, this has been Inspiring Doubt. I'm your host, Greg Bray, and join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time. Next week, we will be joined by Dr. John Shook of the Center for Inquiry, and secularactivism.org is the new organization that he's working with. It runs sort of massively online or massively open online classes that I'm trying to remember the other acronym he used for it, but MOOCs that are far more interactive than what we have before, and they include people like Dr. Richard Carrier, Greta Kirstina, and several other very prominent skeptics and academics are running courses that are available for other people, and he's going to be joining us to discuss that project and promote the widespread access to critical thinking that they are bringing to the table. So join us again next week, 6 p.m. And Justin, once again, thank you for joining me. This has been Inspiring Doubt. Have a great night.